Have you ever felt that something's amiss in our world? That a hidden force is at play behind the scenes? In a time when trust in our political leaders is at an all-time low, our intuition is telling us there is something wrong in our reality. Yet we cannot pinpoint exactly what is wrong. As the great Manly P. Hall once said, "It's not the wrath of the Almighty, but the stupidity of man that is causing most of the trouble." This podcast is not about personal gain or fortune. I'm here because I recognize that in the crisis of overwhelming ignorance and deception in which we live, I have a moral obligation to communicate what I know to be taking place in our world in order for something to be done about it. Welcome to the Free Your Mind Canada podcast, where we dive into deep state politics, philosophy, the occult, spirituality, and above all else, natural law. This podcast is all about human freedom, and I'm your host, Adrian Cleveland, inviting you to join me on this enlightening journey.
I'll never surrender. I'll never surrender. I'll never surrender.
All right, welcome to episode 4 on non-governmental organizations. Once again, this is something that has an ostensible purpose versus a true purpose. So, ostensible means represented or appearing as such, not actually being what appearance indicates, suggesting an appearance to unaided senses, not borne out by rigorous examination or greater knowledge, based on deceptive resemblance or faulty observation, or influenced by emotions that prevent a clear view, or in other words, illusory. So what is the ostensible purpose of non-governmental organizations? Supposedly they're an organization that's independent from government and typically non-profits serving a humanitarian cause. They supposedly conduct philanthropy, so they're altruistic organizations, and they support a broad range of social developments. And it's a network of privatized nonprofits that provide a social service, usually with financial aid from corporations or governments, and they fund charities. Some big player philanthropist organizations in the world are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which supposedly gives a lot of their funding to human health initiatives. And then right behind that, Bill's saying it's the best investment he makes. The returns are 20-1. Another organization is the Clinton Foundation, getting charities from Bill Clinton's public speaking events, using those charities to give their corporate buddies contracts like they did after the earthquake in Haiti, and then those corporations not actually going out and doing the work. Then you have the Open Society Foundation. This is a foundation by George Soros. So all these leftist organizations, philanthropic, non-governmental organizations, they are funded by that man. And then another key philanthropist organization in the world is the Rockefeller Foundation. And if you don't know the history of what they funded, you really don't know who started a lot of these institutions we have today. So these are the people behind our pharmaceutical institutions, our medical institutions, our education institutions, and the sexual revolution, which I might do another episode on the Rockefellers in a later episode. But Let's stick to NGOs for now. So the nonprofit industrial complex, and this is the criticism of it. Government uses nonprofits to monitor and control social justice movements, diverts public monies into private hands through foundations, manage and control political dissent, redirecting activist energies into the non-profit career rather than grassroots community organizing capable of actually transforming society, and allows corporations to mask their exploitative practices through so-called philanthropic work. Critics say this world of foundations masked as philanthropy causes nonprofits to become more invested in the agenda of their benefactors rather than in the communities they claim to serve. Activists claim that once they join the world of the nonprofit industrial complex, they spend their time and energy writing grants seeking money from big corporations and donors. Some activists feel this is the only way to get funding for projects as opposed to continuously asking the community for funding. So in other words, some of these philanthropic non-governmental organizations, like the ones I mentioned in the previous slide, are there to help with corporations masking whatever expletive practice they want to conduct in order to gain profit. And then there's some non-governmental organizations where people truly want to do good in the world and be a charity and help the community. But in order to get money, they have to get these grants from either the government or these massive corporations or something like George Soros's Open Society Foundation. And instead of doing all the charitable work that they claim that they want to do, they spend all their time researching up ways to get grant money. And so they lose their ability to really be a grassroots force within the community. And instead, they have to be beholden to the people that are giving them money, so the benefactors. And so you can imagine if you're beholden to them, you're beholden to what their interests are. So the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, and the Bilderberg Group. Let's see what those non-governmental organizations are about.
Tonight on Alternative Views, we're going to take a look at the political side of the American power structure through the focus on three organizations: the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderbergers. Those don't sound very familiar to you? Well, that's by design, folks. The people who run the country don't want you to know how the country's run, or how they try to run it as best they can for themselves, because if you really knew, you wouldn't like it. Well, we're going to expose a little bit of this tonight on Alternative Views by talking about these three organizations, by going back and taking a look at three previous programs in which we talked about them, but we're going to put them together in one focus tonight.
Well, the Bilderbergers is a strange thing because they've been meeting since 1954 and very little has been said about it. There's been almost a complete news blackout. Well, the first meeting was in 1954 at the Bilderberg Hotel in Holland. That's how they got their name. Who are they? Well, David Rockefeller is the chairman, the head man of the Bilderbergers. He's also head man of the Chase Manhattan Bank, of the Council of Foreign Relations, and of the Trilateral Commission. The participants are a mix of the most powerful men of the transnational oil sector of the world economy, the multinational banks, and also the important leaders of the world, political leaders. And this is supplemented by key congressmen, military leaders, representatives from the intelligence and police organizations like CIA and Interpol, the elite foundations, members of the mass media, and the Rockefeller think tanks and the elite universities. These are people from the NATO countries, basically, and they're people like this from the U.S. who meet with their counterparts in 3-day sessions, 3-day meetings in extreme secrecy with great security precautions taken. Now, I say since 1954 this has been going on, and nothing has been in the television about it. Very, very little has been in any of the newspapers. Now, the right wing has been screaming about it constantly. What are these people doing? But the interesting thing is, not only do all of these people, most powerful people in the world, meeting together, but nobody knows what is happening, except a little bit here and there. We can find out they do discuss working papers of various sorts, like the decline of American power, or what to do about the American dollar, things like this. But basically we don't know, but there are a lot of very impressive facts about this. One is that several men who were invited to attend the Bilderberg meetings later became the #1 or #2 men in their government of their respective countries, like Gerald Ford, Helmut Schmidt, Nelson Rockefeller, Harold Wilson, Edward Heath, and Walter Mondale. In addition to that, there are a lot of people who used to be powerful in the government who still meet with the Bilderbergers. And so you find a continuation of people. For instance, Dean Acheson, Dean Rusk, Henry Kissinger, his big nephew Brzezinski. All of these people, Republican or Democratic administrations, it doesn't make any difference. They're all there with the Bilderberger, the organization.
This is what might be called a capitalist cartel, basically.
And these meetings are held in great secrecy, as I said. They have roadblocks, bulletproof cars. They had one meeting on an island. Before they had the meeting, they moved everybody off the island. They had another one in another meeting in a hotel where they moved everybody out of the hotel, brought in all new staff, and after having security checks on the new staff, they wouldn't let them leave the hotel for the 3 days of the meeting. One important aspect of the Bilderberg Group is probably that here's the place where consensus is effective, so that they can present a worldview that's pretty much the same and work out any problems or rough spots which they may have in the international organization. And of course, out of the same type of organization, kind of coming out of the closet, has been the Trilateral Commission. As a matter of fact, the Trilateral Commission was discussed at a Bilderberg conference, and after it was discussed and approved, then the Trilateral Commission was established. And this is where we have Gary Klein. Tell us about the Trilateral Commission.
Well, if the Bilderbergs have been secretive, it's at least time for them to sort of present some of their programs. Eventually they have to do this, they know. So I think this presentation has taken the form of a new organization in which there is a great deal of overlap, the Trilateral Commission. Again, we find David Rockefeller at the very pinnacle of the Trilateral Commission. They describe themselves as a private North American, European, and Japanese initiative on matters of common concern. What they would like to do is fashion a stable world order on after the fashion of the one produced after World War II by many of the same people and certainly the same interests as represented, for instance, in the Council on Foreign Relations. The kernel of the idea for the Trilateral Commission arose in the head of probably its mastermind, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's now National Security Advisor to President Carter. In 1970, he talked about the need for collaboration between these three areas of the world, Japan, North America, and Western Europe. The need for collaboration to face certain problems, obstacles to the continued expansion of the capitalist world order. David Rockefeller thought this was a very good idea. Brzezinski has been been David Rockefeller's advisor for many years, and Rockefeller proposed that a trilateral group be set up at a meeting at Bilderberg's in 1972. This proposal was greeted with enthusiasm, and by July of 1973, the Trilateral Commission was officially formed. Shortly after that, it's interesting to note, they had selected already now President Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale as commissioners. They did this expressly for the purpose of running them for high office in the United States. There were certain meetings between David Rockefeller and Jimmy Carter as early as 1971 in which David Rockefeller decided that Carter would be the perfect person to build their hopes on. So Carter, Mondale, and in the Republican camp, Elliot Richardson were all invited to be commissioners with the hope that at least one of these people would be the future president. As it turns out, of course, Carter has become president, and out of the 74 American commissioners, about 21 of them are now in the Carter administration at very high levels.
Brzezinski and Vance, who are two of the most powerful people in the Carter administration, came out of the Trilateral Commission. And the interesting point here is that shortly after Carter was elected, when he was forming his cabinet, or maybe it was just before the election, he said publicly, there'll be no Brzezinskis or Vances in my administration. I'm going to bring new faces in. And then after he was elected, suddenly the whole of the Trilateral Commission ended up in his cabinet.
There's, of course, Brzezinski, who taught Carter everything he knows about foreign affairs.
That isn't much, is it? He knew the job.
Afraid not. Cyrus Vance, Harold Brown, Secretary of Defense, Michael Blumenthal, Secretary of Treasury, C. Fred Bergston, Assistant Secretary of Treasury, Warren Christopher, Deputy Secretary of State. The list goes on and on. Warren Christopher, Richard Cooper, Lucy Wilson, Richard Holbrook, Anthony Lake, Andrew Young, surprisingly.
There's a connection between the Bilderbergers and the Trilateral Commission in that 50 of the 59 U.S. Trilateral Commission members as of August 1975, at least 19 were either had been to Bilderberg meetings themselves or came from organizations who had representatives at Bilderberg meetings. So that
it remains to be seen, of course, about how much influence they have on policy making.
This isn't just a group of people who talk about things and hold office. They are implementing their policies. And one thing, the Joint Economic Report of the Joint Economic Committee of the Congress of the U.S. in 1974 looked like it was written by the Trilateral Commission, just right down the line, everything the Trilateral Commission wanted. So I looked to see who was on the Joint Economic Committee, and lo and behold, half of them were either Bilderbergers or from the Trilateral Commission, and one of them was on both.
I'd like to talk a little bit about their domestic goals. What do they really want? They're convinced that there is too much democratic participation allowed, that there's too much, it's making economic planning of the world capitalist system very difficult for them. So one of their domestic goals is to centralize economic planning. The governability of democracy, according to Samuel Huntington, who is a very influential person in this group, depends upon an expansion of capital and continued accumulation, which is virtually impossible if the people run the system. They think that an elite is much better equipped to make decisions which maximize profits. They feel that this will require stronger political leadership and a consolidation of political parties. Of course, the new rules about government aid funds for parties is one effort to strengthen the party system. What Huntington has realized is that the party system can be used very effectively to reduce participation. In his words, apathy is very functional, and the party system can be used in a sense as a rubber stamp for policies that are made elsewhere in the system.
The name of the article that Gary is citing by Huntington is titled "The Democratic Distemper," as if democracy was a disease like rabies. Basically, these people believe that in the 1960s, all the struggles of the New Left, the blacks, the women's movement and such, created chaos and disorder in the domestic as well as the international situation. And they thought that this created instability that had to be replaced by elite governance. I think it's important to note that all of these groups that we're talking about have as their ideal the stabilization of the status quo, the management of the system, from concern with management of the very top, from the very top of the world capitalist economic order to domestically the management of the polity here in the United States. And that is clearly their main goal.
The bedrock organization of the American power structure, particularly in relationship to the political sphere, is the Council on Foreign Relations. We'll see how our leaders and policy originate within the CFR.
The Council of Foreign Relations was really started back at the end of World War I, but didn't come into its own really until the start of World War II. It's comprised of people. First, it was restricted to the top businessmen and financial leaders of Wall Street within a 50-mile radius of New York. It isn't quite that restricted anymore, but still it's mainly the New York, the Wall Street bankers and lawyers who control the steering and advisory committees of it. What they have done over the years is basically to do several things. First, set U.S. foreign policy. Second, determine what is acceptable in the way of policies and what is discussable in proper governmental circles. They've also been very important in determining a consensus and eliciting a consensus from the upper class, particularly the large corporations and the American upper class. Now, when I say they largely determine foreign policy, there's a tremendous book that was just come out called Imperial Brain Trust by Shoup and Mentor. It talks about the Council of Foreign Relations, and it indicates that starting World War II, before the U.S. entrance into it, the Council of Foreign Relations had some discussion groups, and these discussion groups in turn influenced government because there were people from the Council of Foreign Relations who were in top government posts, and these people were listening to their fellows in the Council of Foreign Relations. So much of our foreign policy, which ended in us getting into World War II against the Japanese, was a direct result of the policy set in the Council of Foreign Relations. Then during the war, the planning for a post-war period, once again, was done mainly in the Council of Foreign Relations, and it became so closely allied with the State Department that they actually moved offices into the State Department. And the study groups, once again, the output of this actually became foreign policy in the United States. So not only just the immediate post-war policy, but also the extended post-war policy, including the policy toward Vietnam, Guatemala, and Cuba. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, these ideas were hatched from the Council of Foreign Relations and accepted by the U.S. government.
Some of these were the U.S. entry into World War II, determining U.S. world area of interest, the decision to drop the atomic bomb, the Marshall Plan, United Nations, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. These ideas were all hatched in the Council on Foreign Relations. The origination of NATO, the post-war policy towards Soviet Union, China, Germany, and South Africa, the decision to end the Vietnam War was decided in the CFR. The conduct of the Cuban Missile Crisis was determined by CFR people.
When the government would have various special advisors, most of these people would be from the Council of Foreign Relations.
The Nixon administration is a good example because in it there were 110 Council on Foreign Relations members participating. Now, as far as the CFR itself, in 1 year alone, 1965, of the 1,400 people in the organization, 176 were currently in government and 400 more previously. Now let's look at previous administrations.
You look at the State Department, there were 6 men since, from the Eisenhower administration to the present. 6 men have been Secretaries of State. All of them had been on the Council of Foreign Relations. 1 of them was on the Trilateral Commission, and 4 were Bilderbergers. Secretary of Defense, there were 8 men, 6 from the Council of Foreign Relations, 2 were Bilderbergers, 2 from the Trilateral Commission, and on like this. So even the CIA, the 7 directors of the CIA, 5 were from the Council of Foreign Relations, 1 was a Bilderberger, and one of the persons who was the head of the CIA actually helped to establish the Bilderberg organization. And the National Security Advisor, there are 9 men, 8 from the Council of Foreign Relations, 6 are Bilderbergers, and 1 also from the Trilateral Commission.
Very interesting that the Council of Foreign Relations, the head man in that is David Rockefeller. The head man at the Bilderbergers is also David Rockefeller. And the top man of the Trilateral Commission is David Rockefeller. This is just a small part of it. When you start looking at the organizations which they control and which relate then into foreign policy and domestic policy, then you can get the real impact of the, well, you might call it the American ruling cartel.
The Bilderberg Groups consist of some of the largest visible corporate, political, and royalty members of the world. They hold their meetings annually, usually in remote places where there's no media allowed, at least to broadcast what goes on, because there's plenty of members of the media attending the meetings, such as Chairman of the Board of the Washington Post, major media outlet owner Rupert Murdoch, and news anchor Peter Jennings. Some of the other members include Presidents of the United States, such as Bill Clinton and Gerald Ford. Bankers attend, of course, World Bank President Wolfensohn, Alan Greenspan, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Timothy Geithner, President of the Federal Reserve, and somehow became U.S. Secretary of Treasury. He looks confused about it too. That would be like the President of RBC becoming our Finance Minister. It just reeks of corruption. Dozens of corporate giants sit in as well, such as the CEO and Chairman of Google, the CEO of IBM, and the Chairman of Nokia and Shell. And who could forget the hard-working royal families? Prince Charles of England and Queen Sophia of Spain. Both go to Bilderberg. And wouldn't you know it, Pierre Trudeau, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper have also all attended. In 1996, Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien, among other Canadians, attended the Bilderberg meeting held in Toronto, King City. The building picked was naturally a $66 million resort, which was then owned by CIBC Bank. Some of the other members that attended that year were Ted Rogers, Chairman, President, and CEO of Bell Canada, Chairman of Ford Motor Company, everyone's favorite Conservative Premier of Ontario, Mike Harris, Conrad Black, owner of many newspapers, and just recently sentenced to 78 months in a U.S. federal prison for wire fraud and obstruction of justice, Chairman of CIBC Bank, President of the National Bank of Hungary, David Rockefeller, Chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank, and many, many more.
And an unimaginably coordinated collaboration to keep all the different industries on Earth connected to each other, in order to ensure they all work in the elite's interests. This happens at the World Economic Forum, one of the most important organizations in the world. At its annual meeting in Davos, the CEOs of the largest companies on Earth gather along with heads of state, politicians, and other influential individuals and organizations like UNICEF and Greenpeace. Serving on the board of trustees are former US Vice President and climate change guru Al Gore, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, the President of the European Central Bank Christine Lagarde, the Director of CERN Fabiola Gianotti, the Queen of Jordan, the Director of the International Committee of the Red Cross Peter Maurer, and many other politicians and CEOs of the world's most influential companies. According to the WEF's official website, their annual membership fee ranges between 53,000 and 530,000 euros. But according to the WEF's year reports, around 71% of their total budget comes from its partners, who in this way pay for the membership of young politicians who cannot afford their own fee. Wikipedia reports the following. According to critics, the WEF is a business forum where the wealthiest companies can negotiate deals with other companies or with politicians. The purpose of the WEF for many of the participants would be personal gain instead of solving global problems. I don't like to make assumptions, but would there be so many problems on Earth if the key industry leaders, bankers and politicians since 1971 had gathered annually to solve our world's problems? Is it not strange that the world's leading environmental organizations have been meeting for 50 years with the CEOs of the most heavily polluting corporations while things just keep getting worse for our natural world? That these critics of the WEF are right soon becomes clear when we look at who the most important partners are that account for almost 71% of the WEF's budget. There are BlackRock, the Open Society Foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many other large corporations of whom Vanguard and BlackRock own the shares directly or indirectly. The president and founder of the WEF is Klaus Schwab, a German professor and businessman. In his book, The Great Reset, he describes in detail the plans of his organization. The coronavirus, according to him, is the excellent opportunity to literally reset our society in every regard. He calls this Build Back Better, and this slogan seems to be the motto of all globalist politicians in the world.
And it's now a historical moment, a crucial moment to rebuild the future, to reset our policies.
And of course, we also want to work together on building back better.
You know, I said we're going to build back and we're going to build back better.
It's certainly a major crisis, but it also offers us a unique opportunity.
We must use this historical opportunity.
Together we can turn a crisis into an opportunity.
But this global pandemic has also created an opportunity to build back better.
To build back better later.
But also to build back better.
To build back a better world.
To build back better.
We can't just build back, we got to build back better.
And achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
And climate action is an essential part of that.
According to Schwab, our old society should be exchanged for a new one, in which countries give up their sovereignty to an all-encompassing world government, in which people own nothing but work for the state, in exchange for their housing, healthcare, and all their other basic needs. All of this is necessary, according to the WEF, because our modern consumer society, which the elite themselves imposed on us, can't keep going as it is. It's no longer sustainable. Schwab says in his book that we will never return to the old normal. And the WEF published a video that makes it clear that in 2030 we will own nothing, but we will be happy.
When you brought the Young Global Leaders Program here for executive education and then the Schwab Fellows, but there are two countries in the world now in which the young global leaders have emerged. Tell us just a bit about that in terms of the governance.
Yes, actually, this notion to integrate young leaders is part of the World Economic Forum since many years. And I have to say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with the president, who is a young global leader.
So there you have it. You have the Bilderberg Group, a bunch of powerful people getting in a room together in secrecy, plotting to run the world. And a lot of people say, well, that's a conspiracy theory. What do you think they're doing? Stop being naive. Of course they're running to plot the world. And then you have a network between the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations. And the entire US government, especially foreign policy, is run by the CFR. And so you wonder where these policies come from, of these foreign policies, why we have to go to war or overthrow this regime or this government anywhere in the world. It comes from these technocrats from the CFR. They are the neocons. They are the deep state of the United States. And then you have the World Economic Forum, and there you have right out Klaus Schwab's mouth. All our major cabinet leaders, all our political leaders right now here in Canada are trained from the World Economic Forum. And who's funding the World Economic Forum? It's BlackRock, it's Vanguard. In the old day, it was the Rockefellers. They were the bankers. So non-governmental organizations are the way that these powerful people, whether they be in corporations or they be a part of the banking, international bankers, this is how they infiltrate governments and determine how policy is created. They are what we discussed in the first episode on government. These are the people behind the crisis of democracy, that we can't allow democracy to flourish and for the people to make the decisions of what they want to happen in government. We need to be the technocrats that determine how society is shaped. And so these non-governmental organizations that do up all these papers, scientific papers, there was a term for it, and it's called technocracy. And technocracy really started at Columbia University. It is the so-called scientific answer to social and political problems. And so it's scientific engineering of society. And it's a merger between the hard science and social science. And so to use the scientific method and apply it to society. And from there, the technocrats formulate the policy. So in other words, they're trying to use the scientific method, which we've used to understand material science and physical science, and say that method works for understanding social science and understanding how we can formulate society in the correct goal, in the correct way. And the problem with that is social science is not the same as hard physical science, because people have free will. And that means there's an infinite amount of possibilities that can be done. You cannot formulate society based on physical material science. And so these technocrats are trying to formulate policy based on so-called science. And what does that mean? That's a scientific dictatorship, within society. That's a form of neo-feudalism. And this was discussed by Friedrich Hayek in his book, The Road to Serfdom, where he was quite critical about these technocrats, or what we would consider central planning. So technocracy is implemented in government through central planning. And this cannot work because people are not chess pieces to move around on a board. Like I said, they have free will. Central planning is a form of socialism or positive law and is an attack on classical liberal principles and leads to what Hayek called serfdom. So the issue with central planning is it gets rid of individual rights and liberties. It means a small group of people plan society out for everyone else. And there's only two ways you can implement your plan on society, and that's through either force or coercion, and both are wrong. So what you have is an authoritarian state. So you can come up with a central plan, but not everybody's going to agree with and go along with the central plan. And all of a sudden, the central plan doesn't work. And then we need one person in high power to come along and fix everything for us. And then that one person gets an ultimate level of power, and that's how totalitarian states are formed. So the idea that a few technocrats can determine how the world should run and how government should run based on their so-called science, which obviously benefits the people paying their paycheck, which is these corporate a-holes called BlackRock and Vanguard and the central bankers of the world. They are going to determine how society should function, and that's a form of feudalism. So these non-governmental organizations, they have been investigated in the past in the United States. So I'm quoting here, as regards the foundations created for unlimited general purposes and endowed with enormous resources, their ultimate possibilities are so grave a menace, not only as regards their own activities and influence, but also the benumbing effect which they have on private citizens and public bodies, that if they could be clearly differentiated from other forms of voluntary altruistic effort, it would be desirable to recommend their abolition. And that is out of the final conclusion of the Walsh Commission in 1916, which studied the role of charitable foundations in being used as what they say, quote, instruments of power concentration, which is what they are. This was also studied by the Reece Committee in 1954. And so the Reece Committee studied foundations to see if they were involved in, quote, un-American and subversive activities for political purposes, propaganda, or attempts to influence legislation. Reece said that the investigation revealed that, quote, an unparalleled amount of power is concentrated increasingly in the hands of an interlocking and self-perpetuating group. Reece also notes that he had the, quote, almost impossible task of telling, quote, the taxpayers that the huge fortunes piled up by such industrialist giants as John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and Henry Ford were today being used to destroy or discredit the free enterprise system which gave them birth. It is in the fields of education, international affairs, and what are called the social sciences that the greatest damage can be done to our society. For this reason, the Reese Committee confined its inquiry almost entirely in these areas, end quote. And it concluded that it was an attempt to promote oligarchical collectivism. So a lot of these non-governmental organizations, like Reese stated, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Fords, really made their fortune based out of a free enterprise system. Now you can go into the history of how they cheated their competitors, but really it was a free market at that time. And then with all their riches, they started getting their hands in government and creating regulations. Then all of a sudden we no longer have a free enterprise, free market system, which generates wealth and prosperity. Instead, it's no longer that type of capitalist system. It's back to a collectivist control. It's a form of socialism, socialism for the rich, not any form of socialism for you and I, just them. So we went over the ostensible purpose of non-governmental organizations. So what is the true purpose of non-governmental organizations? It is to hide capital assets in tax-exempt foundations, influence social institutions such as education and science through grants, formulate and use as a tool to conduct foreign policy, or what they're doing now called globalization, forge consensus and cohesion within the corporate class, the elites, and develop new policies and political strategies that favor the elites, and stage oligarchical collectivism behind the scenes. That's what non-governmental organizations do.
Won't be televised, government been telling lies. If you're not with us, you better step aside. Witnessing a genocide, everything is centralized. The food that we consuming, they spraying it all with pesticides. Easily identify the sheep and the snake, the real and the fake, giving us a reason to pray. I'ma make my own choices, a voice for the voiceless. They trying to destroy us, avoiding the poison. It's all pointless if you don't have a purpose. If you read the verses, you'll know who we versing. Government can tell you what your worth is, look deeper than the surface. They don't even want you researching or asking questions. We all being tested. Shut your mouth, they comply, that's the message. Want you depressed on prescriptions that mess with your head, got you stressing, suppressing expression.
We will not comply with the institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply. Institutions, sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution.
Keep the money, I would rather have my soul. They want power and control, that's their number one goal. All my friends turn to foes, look how easily they fold. Even Nazis say they were doing what they told. Walking down this road all alone in the cold, but my soul never sold. I'm exposing the clones. God has chosen this role. All of those who oppose want me hopeless and broke, like I'm Noah on boats. I'm just trying to tell them all about the flood. I can feel it in my bones, I can feel it in my blood. Man, I came up out the mud, only God is my